Hi guys, it's Blackie and welcome back to the channel. Okay, today is going to be a little melting pot. It's going to be an after action report. It's going to become an update about things to come, and it's going to be a cautionary tale about when things go wrong. So let's dive into it. This past weekend I drove 500 miles north to North Carolina to go to the Mountain Readiness Expo up near Harmony, North Carolina. And it was a very good event. A lot of people there. It unfortunately got a lot of rain and that kind of hurt attendance. But it's a good site and there were a lot of good people there. And I would encourage you to go look at it next year and go to attend it. A lot of good classes too. For those that don't know, it's a mix of prepper type stuff with homesteading type stuff, self-reliance type stuff, and a little bit of bushcraft type stuff, all mixed in together. So there was a class on how to butcher a chicken, clean it all the way to cooking it. There was classes on plants, micro growing, as well as larger type things. There were a class on dogs, canine stuff. There was tactical stuff there with guys that build custom ARs for target and tactical. There were authors there. There were instructors there. A lot of big names were there. So it really was a good event. Now let's deal with my particular piece of this. As you know, it's an election year, so you know they're tearing up the roads and working on the roads. And of course, they were. So when I got through Atlanta and through the other big towns in South Carolina, North Carolina, etc., it was kind of tiring, you know. Plus it's hot. The temperature was, with heat index, was up like 95 or something. It was high humidity. And it's one of those days where doing nothing, sitting in the shade, you just perspire. There's nothing you can do about it. I was constantly wiping sweat off my face. And so I got there kind of late in the day after a 9-hour trip. I hooked up with my two nieces, Trinity and Carly. And, you know, we got her vending tent that is made ready gear set up with the Civil Wars merch and the other things that she carries, and we got it done. And then it was cooked supper right quick, and then finally it's past sundown, guys. We're tired, and so it was a trip over to the showers for a hot shower and, as I like to say, defunkify. And then it's back to the camp. And I had not set up my tent yet. I had, as said earlier, I was going to be taking that One Wind stealth tent with me, but I'll be honest, I was just a bloody tired, and I didn't want to dig it all out and get going again. So I decided to try something I had not done. I decided to try this as a personal challenge. I had never slept in the back of my Pathfinder. Now, these seats that you see right here do lay down. And I found if I got on a diagonal with like my feet here, I could be in that corner and I could stretch out diagonally in there. Unfortunately, since I hadn't planned on this, I had my thermarest mat I was going to put inside the tent. And so I doubled it in half and put it up there, but it's not exactly flat. You've got the hump where the bottom of the back of the seats are, and there's a hinge there where the two seats are folding up and down. That stuck up a bit. So by taking and making a pallet back there, I took my little flannel sleeping bag I keep in here. This is just a real light bag. Now, those that follow my channel know that during the winter I carry an old down bag. It's got duct tape on it because it's got some holes in it. In here is emergency. But now that it's warmed up, I've made the transition over to summertime. So I had put just this in there, swapped it out a while back. So with this and that thermarest, I was able to get enough padding to get in there comfortably. Now the temperature was, oh, I'd say it felt like it was the low 80s. And we went to bed probably about 9 p.m. We were that tired, and you just, being out in the heat just sucks it all out of you. You ain't got no energy left. And so after a good meal, a hot shower, I didn't want to get sweaty again. I made my pallet in here and I laid down. And I left all the windows open in the Pathfinder, trying to get a little bit of air movement. But when you have that kind of oppressive heat and the sun's been blazing for 10 plus hours, the ground is hot. And so immediately after sundown, and even though the sun's gone, the ground radiates heat back. Much like you pull a hot pot out of the oven, it radiates heat, even though it's not in the oven. Well, that's how the ground is doing. And the air goes up. You could look up at the tops of the trees and see them moving, but there was no air down here at ground level because all the air is doing this, expanding upward. And that's going to take several hours for that to cool down. Somewhere during the night, I'm figuring about 3 a.m., we did have that. And an atmospheric occurrence that doesn't happen all that often happened to us that night. When you look at the weather, and they're talking about the highs, the lows, they'll also mention the dew point. Most people don't even pay attention or even understand what the dew point is. But in plain English, dew point is this magic number where theoretically, if the temperature got to it, all the water would fall out of the air. Expanded warm air can hold more moisture than cool air. And so it's the point that all the water would just fall out and it'd be dry air. Okay. In nature, it would be an extreme case that the actual temperature ever hit the actual dew point. It never gets to it because something occurs. And that's what happened while we were up there. What happens is whenever you get usually within 5 degrees of the dew point, this collapse happens and the air becomes super chilled because of it. And even though it's in the 60s, you can get hypothermia. And so I laid down using that pad and I didn't have anything over the top of me. It was too warm. And I figured if I wake up cool, I'll just grab my sleeping bag, which I had brought with me, and I would cover up. And then suddenly at 3 a.m., I woke up shivering. I don't mean cool. I mean shivering. I'm an old woodsman. I'm an old trucker. And you learn to sleep even when uncomfortable. So it conditions us to go a little longer before you wake up. I woke up actually shivering. Not just cool, shivering. And you could see your breath. Every time you breathe, it felt like it was in the 30s. It's not. But the actual dew point was 62 and we hit 64. Probably about from 67 it collapsed quickly down to 64 in a matter of just a few minutes as that cooling effect happens. And suddenly I was waking up cold. I don't mean chilled. I mean I was shivering. I was so cold. Several other people in camp experienced the same thing. They suddenly woke up and they were just freezing and they had to grab their covers or whatever. Well, no big deal, right? I'm going to reach over and grab my sleeping bag. Where's your sleeping bag at, Blackie? There's my pack, there's my this, and I fumbled around, put my headlight on, and I couldn't find it. Somehow in the unpacking and all the confusion of setting up and everything, my sleeping bag had ended up in the driver's floorboard up against the seat, so I could not see it from the back. And I didn't know if I had left my sleeping bag or not. I'm shaking pretty violently how cold I am. I don't have anything but my pad underneath me. But Blackie believes in redundancies. And this was one of those opportunities. So I did not have, I had this already underneath me in that pad. But I also carry my Ranger roll. And as those of you who have followed my channel know what a Ranger roll is. It is a poncho. It is a emergency space blanket. And then it is a woobie or poncho liner, as I call it, inside of it, all hooked together to be an emergency bag. I reached over and grabbed this. And I have a emergency set in it. I opened it up, put this around me, and I was warm in 10 minutes. I was able to go back to sleep. But many other people in camp woke up freezing their butt off. The same thing because you were a little bit damp. You were going to bed a little sweaty and sweating a little when you first laid down. Remember that heat's rising. And then suddenly you wake up and you're freezing to bone and you're damp. That is how hypothermia can happen even in the 60s. You've heard them say that hypothermia can happen even in the 60s. That's what they're talking about. If you have something like this occur and then you had wind and didn't have any way to build a fire or get warm, you could have gone hypothermic in those conditions. Usually it happens at higher elevations, but it ain't a guarantee. I've had it happen to me 4 times in my life where I was out camping and we got within 5 degrees of the dew point, and it's a collapse that happens. So always be prepared. So that was the first redundancy with this set that pulled me out this weekend. So I covered up, I got warm, and I went back to sleep. The next day, clouds rolled in, because you know if it's getting hot in the south, it's going to rain. And then in the afternoon, about, say 3 o'clock or so, the rain started. And it was a pretty good thunderstorm rolled over, a lot of lightning, a lot of booming, rain pouring everywhere, and you're trying to adjust and put stuff. Now, my nieces are sleeping in this big nylon modern tent. Those of you that have a lot of experience know what happens in a big modern nylon tent. Condensation gets on the inside and it gets wet inside. Even if it does not drip from the ceiling, puddles form inside of it as water runs down the inside of it because of your breathing, or you can't have airflow in there. And the rain was swirling around us, so you couldn't leave a window open. You'd get wet. So they had to do that. Now, I'm up under the awning. I'm dry. The girls have retreated back in there because it's about to get bad, and etc. When I told them, if you have a poncho, if you're sleeping in a nylon tent and you're going to be in inclement weather, have a poncho with your sleeping bag so that you can just open, if you do get a drip, you just open it up over the top of your bedding and let it drip on this and keep your blankets dry. See, it's an old trick we learned a long time ago. Well, one of my nieces had a poncho and one didn't. So you know what Uncle Blackie did. Here, we're old silver wolves. We will sacrifice anything for the young ones, won't we? I've been wet, I've been cold. Here. And so I gave her my poncho to put over her bed to make sure. Well then, what did I do? Remember my Ranger roll? I went back and I pulled this backup poncho that's part of my Ranger roll off, and I put it on. And I had it. If this hadn't been there, what else did I have? In my haversack, I carry that one wind rain cloak / shelter that I could easily have pulled out and put on. So therefore I had 3 different redundancies there trying to stay warm. Stay dry, I should say. I had my primary poncho, which I had to give up. I had my backup poncho as part of my Ranger roll, and I had a 3rd one in my haversack that's part of my shelter system in my haversack. Therefore, I was going to be dry. And so for the rest of Friday, it rained. Saturday, it rained. Finally, Sunday, it kind of broke up right there as we were leaving out. So everything is wet, etc. Now, I'm a big believer in redundancy in certain key items. I'm going to have more than one knife on me. I'm going to have, if it's going to be inclement weather, I'm going to have more than one way to shelter. More than one way to stay out of the rain, because that can be miserable. And more than one way to be warm. Now, I found my sleeping bag up there in the front seat on Friday morning when I went looking for it. I knew I hadn't left it. But where is it? And I found it, and therefore I transferred it back here to the back. I stayed in the Pathfinder the whole weekend, and I slept comfortably. I was dry, I was warm, and I had redundancies when I would get out. I had ponchos. I had ponchos I could sacrifice for the other members of my party. See? And at the same time, I had what I needed to keep me dry. So, the Ranger roll really paid dividends for me this time, didn't it? Suppose I wasn't at this event, but I had simply broke down in the middle of wherever, and I had not brought a sleeping bag, and it started out hot, and then poof, that thing had hit. By having that Ranger roll, that became my emergency shelter. Since the Ranger roll has that emergency space blanket in it, if it was the other way, it was hot, and I got to block the sun off of me, I can turn that reflective blanket up, put the shiny side to the outside, and cut down on some of that heat coming toward me. Even if I'm going to use the poncho as the actual shelter, I can put that reflective blanket back behind it to lower that and make it more comfortable inside that shelter, right? That's the reason I'm carrying one in my vehicle down here in the south, to have the ability of overlapping abilities. See, I always want to have more than one so that I do have a backup. Now this Sunday, I will be doing another video where I'll be adding something to my Ranger roll. And we will go through it and all the little fire kit, knife, and etc. cordages that ride with that Ranger roll in their set. So that whenever I grabbed it, I had a complete system right there. This right here is a complete shelter system. It's got everything I need to build a fire and to buy time until help arrives. Rides in the vehicle. Also, up in that corner, I have this bag that has MREs and some other things in here, first aid set, etc. This rides with the vehicle. So I had more capabilities. You change this out every season. So every 6 months I rotate it out. In April I rotate it in new in here. See, and I will be carrying water as well. On Sunday in the video, we will take that stuff out and we'll go step by step through it. Do I have a per se bug out bag in it? Not really. But all of this can be worked together to get me home if I have to. But this would be where I'm at in the country. If I broke down and had to walk home, it would probably not be more than a 15-20 miles total, even in worst case scenario. And I could get home with what I got there. But for the most part, it'd probably be a much shorter drive, much shorter walk to get out and find somebody to get help and get a ride home. I'm just being practical. So, hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you learn from my example of always have backup redundancies for these encounters that you're going to have, especially if you're dealing with family or friends, where you may have to sacrifice something over to them to get them through a bad situation. Always be prepared. Till next time, guys, I'm Blackie wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.